As soon as she got into the luxury car, she took off her underwear and quietly stuffed it under the front seat. For her father, she had to resort to this desperate measure. Soon, the owner of the car found the remains she left behind, picked it up and smelled it, and it seemed that the smell was not very familiar. President Park has always been the most intolerant of subordinates who overstep their duties, let alone the driver who dared to use his car as a private battlefield. President Park guessed that if the woman did not have special circumstances, she would never pull her underwear in the car, so he immediately decided to fire the driver. All this was heard clearly by Ki-young hiding in the dark. Seeing that the time was ripe, she pretended to be going downstairs and happened to run into the scene. After pretending to understand what happened, he recommended a mature and steady old driver at the right time. And this old driver was his father Ki-taek. Ki-taek was a taxi driver before, so his driving skills were naturally not a problem. Even when dealing with sharp turns, he can still keep the car running smoothly. Even the coffee in the president's cup did not leak a drop. What's more, he knows the way of human heart, and every word he says goes straight to the softest part of President Park's heart. In this way, the father and daughter who originally lived in a dirty basement, who had no job and no income, successfully entered the rich President Park's house to work. But even so, they were still not satisfied. So they planned to drive away the nanny and let the mother take over this position. But it was not easy to drive away this nanny, because she had been working here as a maid since the previous owner of the house. Not only did she have a deep qualification, but she also had strong business ability. However, after many days of careful observation, they found that the nanny was allergic to peaches. So a peach plan came into being. Ki-young first picked up a peach from the fruit stand, and then used a knife to remove the fluff on it. Then he quietly sprinkled it on the collar of the nanny, who went to the hospital because of allergies. Then it was Ki-taek's turn to do his job. He first pretended to accidentally take a photo of the nanny in the hospital, and then took the photo to Mrs. Park. Then, according to the plot and lines that had been rehearsed long ago, he slandered the nanny with tuberculosis in a vivid and emotional way. When he was about to drive Mrs. Park home, he notified Ki-young in advance to get ready. Then, Ki-young sprinkled the peach hair on the nanny again. When Mrs. Park entered the door, she happened to see the nanny holding a tissue, covering her mouth and coughing violently. In order to make things look more realistic, Ki-taek also took the opportunity to sprinkle a packet of bright red ketchup on the tissue thrown away by the nanny, creating the illusion that the nanny was coughing blood. Mrs. Park fainted immediately after seeing the scene. When she woke up, she immediately asked Ki-taek to keep this matter secret and never let President Park know. Ki-taek naturally agreed happily, but in order to avoid suspicion as much as possible. Ki-taek said that he was not targeting anyone, nor was he a snitch, but was just considering the health of your family. Mrs. Park, who was simple-minded, was very grateful for his good intentions. In this way, with the cooperation of the father and daughter, the nanny who had worked hard for many years had to leave with her luggage. After driving the nanny away, Ki-taek did not rush to introduce. Until this day, the president suddenly talked about the nanny's dismissal. He sincerely thought that this nanny was very good. Except that her appetite was a bit large, and she could eat 2 portions per person, other aspects could be said to be impeccable. Without the help of the nanny, the family would definitely become a mess. Hearing this, Ki-taek handed over a beautiful business card. He also said that this was a membership-based housekeeping company, which sounded very high-end. When she got home, Mrs. Park called, and the person who answered the phone was naturally Ki-young, who had been prepared. She pretended to be very professional while tapping her feet, and she solved the simple Mrs. Park with just 1 sentence. In this way, the mother successfully got the nanny job. But the plan that was thought to be perfect was discovered by President Park's youngest son, because he was keen and smelled the same strange smell on Ki-taek and others. But the simple Mrs. Park didn't take it to heart, thinking that the child was deliberately joking. But the Ki-taek family was worried, so when they returned to the basement where they had been living, they discussed using different soaps to wash in the future. But Ki-young quickly refuted it. She thought that the smell on her body was formed by living in the basement for many years. It is a taste that belongs to the poor, and it will only disappear if they move away from here. Since they can't solve this problem for the time being, they no longer worry about it and start celebrating. Ki-taek took the lead in praising his son Ki-woo, saying that he really made a good friend. It turned out that Ki-taek's family had 4 people, and Ki-taek was forced to lose his job because the taxi company went bankrupt. His wife Chung-suk was originally a ball player and won awards in international competitions. But because South Korea advocates the principle of gold medal supremacy, Chung-suk, who only won the runner-up, had to retire sadly. I thought that poor families could change their fate with knowledge. But my brother took the college entrance examination 4 times and failed to get into the ideal university. Although my sister Ki-young has extraordinary medical talent, she can only stay at home all day because her family has no money to go to cram school. In order to make a living, their family can only rely on folding paper boxes for pizza shops to earn living expenses. Under the influence of the lazy life state, they gradually develop the habit of seeking small profits. They not only eat, drink, and use the internet all day long, but also take the free disinfectant and insecticide provided on a street. After all, the basement where they live is infested with cockroaches, which is a serious problem. Although they are at the bottom of society, they fantasize about being able to rise to prominence without any effort. Unexpectedly, the god of luck actually descended on them. On this day, the family was drinking to celebrate the new Wi-Fi. Unexpectedly, a drunk man suddenly appeared outside and started peeing at their window. The family was very angry when they saw it, but no one dared to stop him. At this time, a man on a motorcycle happened to arrive and drove the drunk away with just a shout. The family was immediately amazed by this. And this guy was none other than Kiwoo's classmate. Because he was about to go abroad to study, he brought a gift to Kiwoo. The classmate said that this was a Shoshan stone that his grandfather had collected for many years, which had the unique effect of gathering wealth and changing luck. Kiwoo was deeply attracted by its unique charm when he first saw the stone, and Ki-taek nodded frequently after hearing it, thinking that this gift was very consistent with the temperament of his family. Only his mother was not interested in this and muttered disapprovingly, it would be better to send some food. The reason why the classmate visited so diligently was actually to ask Kiwoo for help. It turned out that he had been tutoring President Park's daughter, and over time he developed a crush on the girl. The classmate planned to confess his love to the girl after she was admitted to university, so during his study abroad. He hoped that Kiwoo could tutor the girl for him, so that Kiwoo could not only get a generous reward, but also help him take good care of his future girlfriend. Kiwoo didn't understand why the classmate had to find him. After all, he didn't even get into university. The classmate responded, "It is because I trust you the most, and the English knowledge you have accumulated after 4 years of repeating the exam must be far better than those idle rich kids around me." Although he said so, he actually thought Kiwoo was the poorest. It will definitely not be favored by the daughter of the rich man, nor will it pose a threat to his future tutoring job. The classmate also said that the rich man's wife is simple, and she can get away with it even if she makes a fake academic degree. So Kiwoo accepted the invitation. Then he asked his sister Ki-young, who is extremely talented in art, to forge a university enrollment certificate for him. Looking at the certificate in his hand that is so real that it can be mistaken for a fake, Ki-taek couldn't help but sigh. If the university has a forged document major, then Ki-young will definitely be at the top of the list. Before going to the interview, Kiwoo vowed, "I don't think this is forgery or a crime. I will definitely go to this university to study next year." After everything was ready, based on the address provided by the classmates. Passing through the cramped and narrow streets, climbing all the way up, finally found President Park's house on the top of a mountain. This place is completely different from the dim basement where they live. Not only is the courtyard open, with birds singing and flowers blooming, but there is also a huge lawn surrounded by various plants. The villa was clean and tidy. The nanny who received him said that the owner here was originally a very famous architect. After he settled abroad, he was bought by the current President Park's family. Soon, the nanny woke up Mrs. Park, who was sleeping in the courtyard. During the interview, Mrs. Park did not care about Kiwoo's academic qualifications, but wanted to see his strengths directly. In this way, Kiwoo took his first tutoring class under Mrs. Park's audition. Although his academic performance was average, his unconventional teaching method still directly won Mrs. Park's favor and received a whole month's salary on the spot. But while the two were talking, a bow and arrow suddenly flew over. It turned out that the archer was the youngest son of the family. Mrs. Park said that he was an Indian fanatic and usually painted some abstract paintings. Kiwoo praised him as if he were Van Gogh, but his wife was worried that her son was very naughty. He had changed several art teachers before, but none of them lasted for less than a month. Hearing this, Kiwoo suddenly had an idea and thought of a way to get his sister Ki-young in. He lied that he knew an international student named Jessica, who graduated from the University of Illinois in the United States with a major in applied arts. This person not only has superb painting skills, but is also particularly good at communicating with children. Mrs. Park immediately became interested after hearing this and begged Kiwoo to introduce her to him. Kiwoo saw this and said that it was difficult to make an appointment with her, but for you, I will try my best. In this way, Ki-young got the opportunity to interview. But during the interview, President Park's daughter secretly hid in the corner and observed. It turned out that she, who had been ignored by her family, had already liked Kiwoo, who was very caring and considerate to her. So she was very wary of the women around Kiwoo. During the class, Kiwoo also felt her jealousy and a few simple sweet words. Not only did it dispel the girl's doubts, but it also firmly trapped her restless heart. On the other side, Ki-young was also progressing smoothly. When Mrs. Park asked to audit the class. She did not choose to obey like Kiwoo. Instead, she refused decisively, just like a high artist. She had to wait, and Mrs. Park outside the room kept shaking her legs anxiously. She even found the nanny in the basement and asked her to find out the news in the name of sending fruit. As a result, when the two came up from the basement, they were surprised to find that their son and Ki-young were already sitting in the living room. The son, who was originally naughty and disobedient, not only became respectful in front of Ki-young, but also bowed for the first time before leaving. Mrs. Park immediately looked at Ki-young with new eyes. What surprised her even more was that Ki-young could tell from her son's paintings that his son had experienced terrible things when he was a child. Seeing that the time was right, Ki-young began to ask for a sky-high price. Mrs. Park, who was from a wealthy family, not only readily agreed, but also thanked her for saving her son. At this time, President Park also happened to return home. After learning that his son had a new art teacher, he was also very happy and took the initiative to arrange for the driver to take Ki-young home. In order not to expose his identity, Ki-young asked the driver to take him to the subway entrance. But the driver was also a guy who was attracted by beauty and said he would take Ki-young home no matter what. It was not until Ki-young lied that her boyfriend was waiting at the subway entrance that he embarrassedly touched his face and stopped insisting. But this gave Ki-young a little inspiration. So after thinking for a moment, she put her hand under her skirt, and then the scene at the beginning happened. The bottom ants, like cockroaches who had no jobs before, now entered the homes of rich people to work. This made the Ki-taek family suddenly feel superior. So when they saw the drunkard peeing in their window, they no longer endured it, but launched a resistance. It seemed that a good life had finally begun. Soon after, President Park's family welcomed the birthday of their youngest son. To celebrate, Mrs. Park decided to take the whole family out camping. After explaining everything, they drove off. And Ki-taek's family also had the opportunity to enjoy the villa alone for the first time. They quickly occupied the villa like invaders, and Ki-woo lay on the lawn to bask in the sun and read a book. Ki-yeon took a bath and watched TV programs. Chung-suk excitedly performed the hammer throw that he had not touched for many years, and the family enjoyed the life of the upper class. In the evening, it suddenly rained heavily outside, and they sat in the living room, listening to the rain and drinking expensive whiskey, talking about the beautiful life comfortably. Because of the ambiguity between Ki-woo and President Park's daughter, he had imagined that this was his mother-in-law's house. He even thought about how to act on the wedding day so as not to be exposed. During the conversation, Ki-taek said with emotion that Mrs. Park was really nice and simple. Although she was rich, she was kind. But Chung-suk retorted, "It's not that she is rich and kind, but that she is kind because she is rich. If I could have so much money, I would also be kind. Because money is like an iron, it can iron out all the wrinkles of troubles." However, just as they were enjoying themselves, the doorbell outside suddenly rang. And the person who came was the nanny who was fired before. She said, "I was in a hurry when I left, and something important was left in the basement." Seeing that the other party was wet by the rain and seemed to have injuries on her face, Chung-suk couldn't bear it and opened the door. After the nanny entered the door, she went straight into the basement. Chung-suk wanted to wait for her to come up in the living room, but after a long time, no one came. So she followed her down without worry. As a result, she saw that the nanny was desperately pushing a locker against the wall. Although Chung-suk hadn't figured out the situation, he hurried forward to help at the request of the nanny. When the door was pushed open, a narrow passage immediately appeared in front of him. The nanny rushed in like crazy, and Chung-suk followed after a few seconds of hesitation. After passing through a dark and winding secret passage, a dim small room appeared in front of him. A dying man was lying on a small bed. It turned out that this man was the nanny's husband. Because he owed a huge loan shark 4 years ago, he had to hide here. And this shelter was left by the previous owner, so the current President Park's family didn't know about it. The nanny also said, "I cut off the surveillance outside before I came, and no one will find out that I have been here." Then, she begged Chung-suk to send her husband some food every week, and she would pay her monthly remuneration. But Chung-suk didn't want to pay any attention at all, and immediately picked up the phone to call the police. Unexpectedly, Ki-taek, who was eavesdropping at this time, slipped and rolled down the stairs with the three of them. After the nanny saw their appearance clearly, she immediately took out her mobile phone to shoot a video. When she heard Ki-woo accidentally calling out his father, she immediately understood the truth of everything. Then she threatened the Ki-taek family with the video, saying that if they didn't obey, she would send the video to Mrs. Park immediately. The Ki-taek family, who had lost the initiative, had to surrender. After walking out of the basement obediently, they all knelt in the corner of the living room with their hands raised and trembling. The nanny and her husband were on the sofa, enjoying the massage leisurely. During this period, she did not forget to mock the Ki-taek family's shameless behavior. However, just when the two relaxed their vigilance, the Ki-taek family suddenly launched an attack tacitly. In this way, the two sides started a battle for the mobile phone. In the end, two fists were no match for four hands, and the phone was snatched by Ki-taek's family. But just as the video was deleted, the phone in the room rang. It turned out that the heavy rain caused the camping plan of President Park's family to be cancelled, and they had 8 minutes to get home. And Mrs. Park asked Chung-suk to quickly cook a bowl of noodles with soybean paste, and it must be ready when they got home. After hanging up the phone, the Ki-taek family acted quickly. Chung-suk began to make noodles with soybean paste in an orderly manner, and Ki-taek and Ki-woo were responsible for sending the nanny and his wife back to the basement. Ki-yeon stayed to clean up the mess in the living room. But before she could completely clean up, Mrs. Park and her family had already stepped into the door. Ki-young, who had nowhere to hide, had to hide under the table quickly. Just when Chung-suk thought everything was fine, the nanny in the basement suddenly broke free from Ki-taek's restraints. Then she screamed and ran up, but Chung-suk kicked her back easily. Ki-taek, who caught up, was shocked by the scene in front of him. But after coming to his senses, he dragged the unconscious nanny back to the secret room and carefully closed the secret door. When he had packed up everything and came to the small room in the basement again, he found that the man was hitting the switch on the wall with his head. It turned out that this switch was connected to the corridor light of the villa's entrance door. In order to thank President Park for taking him in, the man not only taught himself Morse code, he also expressed his gratitude in this way every time President Park came home. Although the flickering lights were a bit strange, the president never doubted it because he never cared about the details of the family. But looking at the flickering lights, Mrs. Park muttered in her heart and couldn't help telling Chung-suk about a strange thing that happened in the past. It turned out that the reason why the youngest son behaved abnormally now was because he was eating cake alone in the kitchen late one night 2 years ago. Unexpectedly, he saw a strange figure and fainted with foam at the mouth on the spot. Ki-young, who hid under the table and eavesdropped on everything, finally understood that the painting hung on the wall by the president's son was the man who came out to look for food at that time. After the president's family finally returned to the room, Ki-taek tied up the two nannies in the basement and then sneaked out. But when the family reunited and prepared to leave, the president's son came downstairs with a tent. Seeing this, Ki-taek and the other two hurriedly hid under the table next to the sofa. Then the president and his wife also came down. Because the son insisted on setting up a tent to sleep in the yard, in order to observe his movements at all times, they had to make do with the sofa to spend the night. Fortunately, the living room was dim, and they did not find anyone under the table. At this time, President Park suddenly smelled a strange smell and said that the smell was the same as that of Ki-taek's driver. It was like a dried radish that had been left for a long time, with a sour and smelly smell. Ki-taek under the table heard this and subconsciously pulled his clothes to smell it, and then a hatred rose in his heart. He thought he had climbed to a high place, but in the end he was still a rat in the gutter, being ridiculed, mocked, and looked down upon. After an unknown amount of time, the couple finally fell asleep, and the three of them quietly crawled out from under the table. Then they braved the heavy rain and walked down the slope, walking down the stairs. They crossed the downward street, and on the way home, they kept going down. Finally, they walked back to their dilapidated home. But at this time, the house had been flooded by rain, and the dirty water in the house was up to their waists. Ki-taek was the first to rescue Chung-suk's medal because it was the most impressive thing for their family. Ki-young tried to block the toilet that was constantly spraying filth, but unfortunately after many attempts, it was still fruitless. Helplessly, she had to sit on it directly. Ki-woo stared at the floating lucky stone and fell into deep thought. He never expected that the situation would change so quickly. They were still enjoying life in the mansion a second ago. Now even living in the basement has become a luxury. Like all other poor people affected by the disaster, they can only take shelter in a nearby gymnasium. Unable to sleep, Ki-woo suddenly asked his father, "What are your plans for the future?" But Ki-taek said with a dull face, "No plan is the best plan, because once a plan is made, life will never go according to plan. But if there is no plan, there will be no disappointment of unfulfilled hopes." As soon as he finished speaking, Ki-taek found that Ki-woo was still holding the stone. He was very curious why his son didn't let it go, but Ki-woo said that the stone had been following him. In fact, it was not so much that the stone followed him, but rather that the dream of becoming a rich man followed him, so that he was unwilling to let it go. The next morning, the rain stopped and the sun was shining. Mrs. Park put on her makeup delicately while calling Ki-taek's family one after another. It turned out that she was going to hold a birthday party for her son at home and invited Ki-taek and his family to come and attend. In order to have a clean piece of clothing to wear, Ki-taek and his family had to desperately search through the donated materials. Before leaving, Mrs. Park told Chung-suk to place 10 round tables around the tent. Then she asked Ki-taek to take her shopping spree. However, on the way back, he suddenly smelled the unpleasant smell that the president had mentioned before. So he blocked his nose and opened the car window without any concealment, not noticing that Ki-taek's tired face showed an unprecedented coldness. Soon, the guests came to the villa one after another, and the party was about to begin in everyone's expectation. But Ki-woo, who was standing on the second floor and watching everything, suddenly sighed why everyone could be so calm and decent in the face of a sudden invitation. But his family was so cramped and flustered, he felt that the world was too unfair. So the jealousy and hatred in his heart made him take out the lucky stone from his bag. On the other side, in order to surprise his son, President Park and Ki-taek both dressed up as Indians and hid behind the woods where no one could see them. But after the president finished describing the plan vividly, Ki-taek interrupted impatiently and even asked the president a most annoying question about crossing the line. Because at this time, he was already on the verge of collapse, his identity was about to be discovered, and he was homeless. However, the president, who was unaware of it, asked him to play this kind of trick that only rich people would play. Ki-taek's face was ashen and his expression was stern, like a nuclear bomb about to explode, exuding a suffocating sense of oppression. At the same time, Ki-woo, holding the stone, came to the basement while no one was paying attention, ready to kill the two nannies himself. Because he felt that only in his way could their happy life continue. But as soon as he arrived in the basement, he was put around the neck by the man with a wire ring. It turned out that the nanny who had been kicked unconscious before woke up and saw her husband tied up on a chair. She bit off her husband's straps with all her strength. But because of the severe head injury, she didn't make it in the end. She blamed all her hatred on the Ki-taek family and ordered her husband to avenge her. So when Ki-woo showed up, the man attacked. Although Ki-woo found the right time to escape from the passage, he tripped and fell to the ground as soon as he walked out of the door. The man who followed him saw this and directly hit him on the head with the fast luck stone. But looking at Ki-woo lying in a pool of blood, the man still seemed unable to vent his hatred. Then he went to the kitchen, picked up a table knife, and then walked straight outside. Although the scorching sun above his head made it difficult for the man to open his eyes, he still recognized Ki-young holding the cake. So he walked through the crowd without hesitation and stabbed Ki-young in the chest without thinking. The president's son fainted instantly because he saw the strange figure again. The sudden change caused chaos at the scene. Chung-suk rushed over with an axe to avenge his daughter. Ki-taek rushed forward to cover Ki-young's wound. But when he was at a loss and searched for someone to help in the crowd, he suddenly saw Ki-woo, who was covered in blood and dying, being carried away by the president's daughter. Seeing his wife and children in danger, Ki-taek's mind went blank. However, at this time, the president's roar came to his ears again. He urged Ki-taek to send his son to the hospital quickly, regardless of Ki-jun lying on the ground dying. Seeing that Ki-taek was dumbfounded and had no reaction, the president asked him to throw the key over. But as soon as the key flew into the air, it was pressed under Chung-suk, who was fighting. Originally, Chung-suk was already at a disadvantage, but as a former athlete, she suddenly burst out with amazing strength. Chung-suk picked up the slender barbecue tongs at hand and pierced the man's waist fiercely. After completing the counterattack, Chung-suk immediately rushed to Ki-young to check the situation. The president also quickly came to the man to get the key. However, the moment he turned the man's body, the pungent smell came again. Looking at the disgust on the president's face, Ki-taek, who had been pent up for a long time, completely lost his mind. So he picked up the knife on the ground and stabbed it hard into President Park's chest. Mrs. Park was so scared that she fainted instantly. Ki-taek glanced at his wife and daughter and fled the scene in a hurry. A month later, Ki-woo woke up from the hospital bed. Although his life was no longer in danger, he was always smiling like a fool because of the severe brain injury. Although he was sued for forgery of documents, violence, and death, etc. But he and Chung-suk were eventually found to be self-defense, so both were sentenced to probation, but Ki-young died of excessive blood loss. And Ki-taek has disappeared since then, as if he had evaporated from the face of the earth. Until people gradually forgot about the tragedy, Ki-woo, who had returned to normal, began to hold a telescope again. Carefully observed the mansion they had briefly enjoyed. However, he accidentally discovered the flashing sensor light. It turned out that Ki-taek did not go far after leaving the crime scene, but hid in the garage. Because the surveillance was removed by the nanny at the time, Ki-taek's traces have not been discovered. When everyone left, he quietly hid in the basement again, living a parasitic life like the previous man. Because of the murder, the mansion was not sold for a while. During this period, he not only buried the nanny under the tree in the yard, but also learned how to use Morse code. When the new owner moved into the villa, he tried to use lights to send signals, hoping that Ki-woo would see it one day. Because Ki-woo had been a Boy Scout and could understand Morse code. After learning the situation, Kiwoo rushed home and made a detailed rescue plan. Finally, on a sunny noon, he bought the mansion with a successful career. Not only did he live in with Chum-suk legitimately, but he also let Ki-taek walk out of the dark basement. However, all this was just his fantasy. In reality, he was still hiding in the dark and damp basement, waiting for his luck to turn and his dream to come true one day. Parasite is a drama film directed by Bong Joon-ho and released in 2019. The Ki-taek family was originally a poor family living at the bottom of society, with no money and no proper job. They could only live in a cramped semi-basement and barely make a living by doing odd jobs. So when they have the opportunity to get a good job, they start to take it by any means. Then, like cockroaches, they quickly occupy the mansions and upper-class life that do not belong to them. However, no matter how the rats in the gutter disguise themselves, they cannot get rid of the sour smell that melts in their bones and blood. Therefore, they are always unconsciously disliked and despised. And such an experience also makes their already fragile hearts more sensitive, make their behavior and actions more extreme, and finally, jealousy reaches its peak, leading to tragedy. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome everyone to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience in watching, and look forward to meeting you next time.